Hi there, Ramon from Memories, and today we have
Angela? Yep.
Hi Angela, and how long have you been a caregiver?
Oh, wow. So I'm 36 this year. So my mum was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. It was when I was 29. So quite a long period of time, 29, 28. It was just before my 30th. But we think that she had it maybe a bit of time before that as well. So like around my late 20s.
Late 20s. Okay, so about 7 to 8 years approximately. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was the process of the diagnosis like for you? And what signs led you up to seeking help to get a diagnosis? What was that story like?
It was the fact that she forgot how to write, and she would get quite stressed in certain situations, which is not very like her, but the most like telltale sign was that she forgot to write and spell. So at the time, my parents actually had a business in hospital, takeaways, Chinese takeaways, and Mum would always used to take the orders. She was that type of person, like she was always at the counter, like chatting away. Mum was really sociable, and then once she started to forget to write, and take orders and that, and then like she couldn't work the till, like the register, as well. That was one of the biggest signs for us. And then she'd forget, like, we should place stuff, and yeah, those were the most obvious at the time.
For sure, for sure. And what was that experience like emotionally for you as her daughter to see that those kind of odd behaviors start to show up?
That was super hard. It was quite hard to process, especially for someone that you care about and love about the most. But also, it was an odd time because you don't know how to process it also, if that makes sense. Like you don't really understand or know what's going on at that time, because I don't, like, with my experience with my mum, it was a learning step, like all the way, because I've never experienced situations like that before in my life. Like even with extended family, like it doesn't really run in our family, so I didn't really know what it was like to deal with. So that's why it was quite hard to process, like how to do things or how to accept it, like mentally and emotionally.
Sure, for sure. And 28 is a super young age to experience something like that. And as you said, it is for anyone, it's an incredibly difficult experience to process, especially at 28. So how do you think your journey as a caregiver has allowed you to grow personally from having to do it at such a young age?
It's taught me strength, resilience. It also made me think of how my mum would feel as well. Like in certain situations or decisions that we make, I would always put her first and think, how would she feel? Or I would try and put myself in her situation, like, how would I feel if my kids were treating me like that? So she was always at the forefront of my mind, but we also had other challenges because Dad was in denial too. So that was really hard to deal with, trying to get him on the same page as us, but also trying to get him to accept that she is getting sick. That was probably one of the toughest times, was seeing how tough it was on Dad too, as well as Mum.
And
Yeah.
how have you and your dad and your family in general, how do you work together to support your mother currently?
So I'm actually living in another city, in New Zealand. Dad, like, they're only an hour flight away, but if you drive, it's like 8 hours. It's crazy. But I'm not that far away, but I talk to Dad like every week, like at least once a week, or even, like a few times during the week, just to try and gauge what's actually going on. And generally it's in a conversation with Dad. Like sometimes he would say it, but I would also look at like his body language and how he's actually dealing with things, because like expressions like facial expressions and body language and postures and all that, like that kind of says a lot as well, because he doesn't always want me to worry, because he's a parent, so he's always thinking of me as well. He doesn't want me to worry that if something's wrong with mum, that I would instantly rush up there, but I would anyway, if that makes sense.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I
So
think
it's just making sure that we keep in contact, and I will try and figure out what's going on if there is something going on. Try and process it myself, and if there's anything else I can do for Dad, but I would talk to him about it also. But ultimately I would let him make the decision, because he's the main caregiver. He deals with it 24/7. Like I deal with it from a distance, which is quite different. Yeah, even though it is still hard in every way possible, but I understand also, even if I was mum's full-time carer, I do get how hard it is.
sure.
Yeah. Hopefully that answers the question.
Oh, of course. And thank you for sharing that. And I think that's almost a sentiment that we've heard from a lot of caregivers who are in a secondary role, not living directly in the household, that you really are supporting the caregiver, supporting the loved one, as much as you're supporting that loved one, because your father taking on this in a house by himself is really challenging, really overwhelming, and you are playing a very supportive role to him. And I think that's a very admirable thing.
Thank you.
Do you have any advice to anyone who is currently a secondary caregiver, who may be struggling, who may want to feel more involved, or even people who know a caregiver but aren't playing an active role? What advice would you give to them to be supportive, be present, even if you're not physically there?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question. I would try and be as mindful as I can. Try and put yourself in that person's shoe that's being the primary caregiver, but also like just get as much help as you can through every resource that you can. So that includes dementia or Alzheimer organisation, your friends, your family, like get as much support as you can behind you to help you with processing with what's going on, so that in turn you can provide that support to the primary caregiver, because I think that's really important. Like I think a lot of us don't really know, like from my personal experience, I had no idea what I was doing. Like I was kind of just rolling with it. I don't even know if that's the right word to say, but I was kind of just dealing with it step by step, but trying to figure out in my head, along with counsellors. I had really good counsellors back then, and I still do. I do a lot of counselling, which is amazing, and I recommend that to anyone, because it is almost like it is grieving as well. And it's weird because it's grieving for someone that is still alive, which is an odd as process, but it is trying to get all those resources and use them as much as you can possibly, but also connect with people that are going through the same situation as you or similar situation as you. I think that's really important. So and also looking after you, but also just trying to be there as much as possible for the primary caregiver. Just even a phone call, like with Dad, I know that he looks forward to our video calls as much as me being there in person. For that, it's his relief. Like he knows that if he gets a call from me, that I will be there to support him no matter what, but also listening and being like, if he's got a concern, for example, we've just recently had to put mum into nappies, and he couldn't quite process it. Like, and I knew he couldn't process it. I could see it, but I had to give him time to process it, whereas I could already kind of see what was actually going on. She was moving into the next stage of her illness, but I needed Dad to process it. So when we talk in that, I'd try and gauge like actually what's going on, and that from his conversations, whether it's symptoms or signs or what's she doing, has anything changed, and try and go forward from there. I don't know if that answers the question.
No,
Felt like there was a roundabout answer.
no, for sure. And I think you touched on a lot of great points. One, I love how you talked about self-care. I think it's really important for both primary and secondary caregivers is that you can only support someone when you're the best version of yourself. And then it's important to at times take a step back and make sure that you're okay. And then that's the only way you're going to be able to provide support to them. I love the idea of a simple phone call.
What was that, sorry?
Sorry, I think you cut out just for a second.
Yeah, that was really weird. You just froze on my screen.
Were you saying something that, like, did you jump off a point that I just made?
Oh, yeah. So when you said something about the self-care,
Yes.
that took ages to learn because I'm such a control freak.
Right.
Like, self-care, like, I'm that type of person that's so used to go. And I basically hit a wall. It was basically 3 years ago. And it's just, my partner and stuff, like, all the people around me were really supportive and were like, and you need to start taking care of yourself. And I think that's something I've tried to remind myself as well. But I need to also remind Dad, because that's really hard for him to do because he's everything he does is for Mum. But he needs a reminder to be like, hey, you need to take care of you too. Whether he stays in bed for like that little bit of time longer. And if I'm up there, I would normally take Mum in the morning so that he gets that sleep in. It's just the little things that count.
For sure. And I love that. Is, like, being a secondary caregiver, being a support figure in the family doesn't have to be extravagant gestures. It could be phone calls every day. It could be when you go up, allowing the primary caregiver to sleep in, allowing them to take a break. Like, those might seem like small gestures, but they make such a huge difference in both the loved one and the primary caregiver's life. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope that secondary caregivers who are watching will learn from that these gestures make a huge difference in the life of the primary caregiver. So thank you for sharing that. I think 28 to mid-30s is still a very formative time in your professional career. So how has being a caregiver on top of going through this really transformative professional time, how have you been able to balance the two? What advice do you have to people who may be struggling to balance the two right
now? It is really hard to balance your personal and your work. And I still not struggle with it, but I still have at times have found it quite hard balancing work and family. Especially my priorities to my parents and that, and like what I need to do and that, especially with Mum's illness and that. But what did I do? So I have got really amazing support at work, which I think is really important. There's also flexibility at my job, where I do have the opportunity to work in the city where my parents live, which is really awesome, which means I don't have to, like, when I fly up there, it doesn't just have to be a weekend, it could be like a full week, and I could work in the offices and that up there. I think that's really important, is having really good supportive work family, like who are there behind you, who understand what's going on, the pressures and that. It's building that relationship and that trust as well with them to actually get them to fully understand what's actually going on and how important it is to you. Yeah, that would be like my main advice is making sure that the job that you're in does have that flexibility and that supportive unit, because to be honest, if I didn't have that, it would be so much harder. Like, I wouldn't be able to go and see my parents every few months, which is what I actually did last year before like COVID happened and that. I try and get up there as much as I can, but also just making sure that they knew, like my work family would know also like where mum's illness is at, like what stage it's at, because it would affect me at work as well, because I'm still processing it mentally as well, emotionally, physically, like in every way possible. So if I'm feeling a certain way, it isn't because of them, it's because I'm still processing stuff on my end. Yeah. So I found that a lot easier. Like, that was a big weight off me because I'm a workaholic. My parents, like, I've actually been working since I was little, like since I was, I think maybe 7. So I've always been that person that's like used to working. But as soon as mum got sick, and then as her disease progressed, I had to make a choice between like my career and also spending time with mum as much as I can before her disease fully takes over. But it was also trying to figure out my schedule as well, like trying not to burn me out, which is why I emphasize that self-care is super important. So like, I'd say in the last few years especially, like I'd just be traveling. All my holidays were all about my parents, which is completely fine. But all the holidays that we could take per year was always about my parents. So what I've been trying to focus on this year, even though we've got restriction bans and all that, I've been trying to balance a little bit of me, like having time to myself. Like when I take holidays, it's also about me, but also balancing it with my parents as well. Just having that, yeah, that balance. But career and personal wise, it's so hard and it's so different for everyone as well, because I think it also depends on what you do, like what occupation, what work stresses you have. And I guess it gets to a point, like if you're in a stressful job, and it could be a managing job, and I'm not saying all managing jobs are stressful, but I know some can be, from experience, because I've worked as a manager before. I guess it's, you kind of hit that point in your life where you have to decide what's important to you. Career, family, personal, as well as putting yourself in the mix as well. Like, you're human, you can only do so much. So how are you going to find time between a stressful career and also dealing with your personal life, like your mum's or your dad or whoever's in your life that's got the illness? How are you going to spend as much time, but also focus on what's most important to you? Yeah.
I think that you touched on so many great points. I love this idea of balance. You know, there's only 24 hours in the day. You need to take time for yourself. Yes, you have a career, but it's also, I think, being a caregiver causes you to shift your priorities in a way to a more family-centered approach to life. And I think a lot of people can feel guilt. You know, maybe you had a lot of career ambitions, occupational ambitions, and just because you are choosing to prioritize your family in the situation you're in does not take away from your capabilities as a worker. It doesn't take away from anything. It just means that you are shifting your priorities. And I love that point you touched on at the beginning about communication with people in your workplace. It's such an emotionally draining experience to be a caregiver, and your place of work is only going to be able to support you if you're open and honest with them about what you're going through. And I think a lot of caregivers suffer in silence. So thank you so much for sharing that, because it's so important that caregivers come forward and speak about what they're going through and see what resources are available to support them. So thank you again for sharing that perspective. I would love to chat a little bit about social media and the role that's played in your caregiving journey.
Oh, so just talk about like how I started in there.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, gosh, I can't even remember when I started my social media page. But anyway, I started my page, one, to try and spread awareness of dementia, Alzheimer's. To me, it was really important because I didn't feel like there was enough people talking about it, or maybe there's a stigma about it. I just remember thinking that at the time, like, I just feel like we need to be more open about it, because I feel like it's an illness or disease that's becoming more prominent, which is quite scary. But also because mental illness as well as becoming such a big thing, that coincides for me personally with dealing with really hard illnesses or tough illnesses like dementia, Alzheimer's. And I just wanted to provide and be open and supportive as to my experiences, but that's purely from my point of view. And I'm not saying that everyone's circumstances are going to be the same, because we're all completely different, but it's also opened a really amazing platform for me to be able to connect with really cool people. And and we've talked about like our experiences, what we're going through, symptoms, my perspective on circumstances. It's been really awesome that way. And then following that, my page is also about, like, because I've got severe allergies, so like dealing with that, and then talking about, I've also got endometriosis, and it's spreading awareness on those as well. So, but mainly I found my page that people would normally approach me about is my mum, which is awesome, because I'm like, oh, so I'm getting the right message out there. Like, I'm talking about it, my experiences in that, and it's actually reaching people, which is really awesome. So for me, that's really great. And hence my name, I love weightlifting as well. So squats are my thing.
Awesome. And I love how you touched on that. I think a lot of younger caregivers have shared with us that sharing their journey on social media, one, helps caregivers who may be watching and may need advice or may need support. Two, helps them feel connected, because it can be a very isolating experience, especially in a pandemic, when we're not really physically seeing anyone as often. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think social media is a really powerful tool for you to not only feel relief and share your story, but it's also a tool for you to help others. And I think what you're doing is very admirable.
Thank you.
I think my last questions for you today would be, if you had to give any advice to yourself when you first started your caregiving journey, or to someone who's just recently become a caregiver, whether that be primary or secondary, what advice would you give?
Just thinking back to my experiences, my advice to myself or to other secondary caregivers is be patient with yourself, but also with the person that's a primary caregiver, and also the person that's actually sick, because it's so hard on them to process, especially if they're in all cases, they're of a different generation, which means different mindsets, different ways of thinking, different ways of dealing with circumstances. That's what I found the hardest, was dealing with my parents who looked at circumstances and dealt with things very differently. I'm very open in the way that I deal with things, whether it's emotions and talking about things. I just believe being open is really important. Whereas my parents they didn't talk about emotions in that. Like, it wasn't, that's just how they were brought up, and I guess like a cultural thing as well, maybe. But Dad's actually getting a lot better, like, especially with Mum, like, just being patient with them, because I can be very, like, because I'm such a control freak, I'm very like, I want it done now, or like, we should do this now, whereas I have to remind myself, as well as my partner's amazing, he's very like chilled. He's like, but you got to remember, honey, you got to be patient, because this is how they deal with certain things, or you need to let him process it. Be patient. That's probably one of the biggest things. And also, like I've said before, like, get as much resources and support.
Oh, I think you may have accidentally muted Angela. Sorry to cut you off.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. You were saying something about resources?
Yeah, so getting as much resources and a really awesome support group that you can always, that you know that you can always go to, no matter what, whether it's family or close friends, it's up to you. Just getting that really good network of friends or family to be there for you is also really important. Yeah, that would be like my main advice.
Awesome. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I especially loved the way you ended on support. I think that's such an important message for caregivers to hear. Reach out to your resources, reach out to your network, because being a caregiver for a loved one is a full-time job. It's beyond a full-time job. To balance it with parenting, to balance it with a job, to balance it with other aspects of life is incredibly challenging. And reach out to support if it's available to you. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And thank you so much for joining us today. And if anyone watching this wants to learn more about your caregiving journey, where can they find you?
My Instagram page is Dumpling Who Squats. Hence why I'm like, I'm all about weight training too. That's my stress relief.
So check out @Dumpling Who Squats for some amazing weight training advice and caregiving advice. And be sure to tune in next week for our next Memories Caregiver Spotlight.
Cool. Thank you.